Entertaining Talking Sports.
What is going on, Hoops fans? Back at it with another New York Knicks video. Haven't done a ton of New York Knicks videos because I normally do the live streams, but I'm going to have a lot more Knicks videos up during the offseason and going into the playoffs, doing some playoff prediction videos, breaking down the series, whatever first-round series the New York Knicks may have, because we all know that at this point, the Knicks are going to the playoffs. And that in itself is an accomplishment in its own right. This is a team that no one thought would even sniff the playoffs, and if they were going to, they thought for sure they'd be in the play-in game. Well, right now, the New York Knicks look like they're trending that they will be between the 4th and 6th seed headed into the playoffs. And the New York Knicks now are coming off their signature win that I was unable to stream due to the fact that it was Mother's Day yesterday, but their signature win of the year, and if it wasn't that, it was the Jazz earlier in the year. But when you factor in the circumstance, you factor in the pressure that came with this game, and you factor that it was on the road against an LA Clippers team that could easily be going to the NBA Finals this year in a game in which they were trying to win, that was a huge win for the New York Knicks, and it took a lot of pressure off the Knicks' shoulders. Now, the Knicks, in my opinion, what they have to do going forward, they have got to find a way to stay in that 4-5 matchup. And we're going to talk more about the playoff opportunity for the Knicks to stay where they are and some of the things that they need to happen if they're not going to win out. And I'll go over all the contending team schedules over the last 4 games, because that is all that remains between now and the playoffs. But first, let's talk about what this team has accomplished this year and what they've done over this second half, and why I feel if the Knicks are given the right situation and the right circumstances, that they will make the second round of the playoffs, something that they've only done twice since the 1999-2000 season. And the other thing that you need to take into account, that this is just the beginning. Like, this team is not even close to where they're going to be in 2 or 3 years if they continue to build this team up the right way. For the simple reason being, 1, we still have a lot of cap space. 2, all of our players, for the most part, are young and improving, namely RJ Barrett. And I'm going to go over some of the things that he's improved with this offseason. And 3, we have a plethora of draft picks that we will either use to bring in an influx of young talent or use those picks to trade and bring in a potential superstar to put this team on the map where it needs to be, and that is a potential NBA championship contender. Now, any rational, reasonable Knicks fan knows right now we're not there yet. You know, we've definitely exceeded expectations, and we're definitely going to be a tough out when it comes to the playoffs. And I actually think the way that this New York Knicks team is built, I think it's suited for playoff basketball. We all know once the playoffs start that the game slows down. We know that the possessions become less. We know that defense is much more important come playoff time. And I do think the Knicks, because of that, will be a pesky team no matter who they play. The other thing that this team does very well is shoot the 3 ball very efficiently. They're 4th in the league in terms of 3-point percentage. I'll go over some of the interesting stats throughout the year and just how much this team has improved throughout the totality of the season. This team is not ranked this high in 3-point efficiency in a very long time. Last 2 years, they were among the league's worst at about 33 or 34%. This year, they're at 39.1% as a team, which is incredible. And when you factor in the way they started the season over the first month, it's even more ridiculous. But this is a team now that's won 13 out of their last 16 games, including a signature win against the Clippers. And if I would have told you before the West Coast swing started, even after they had won 9 out of 10, that they were going to take 3 out of 6, you sign up for that in a second. I don't care what team you are. If you're the Nets, if you're the Bucks, if you're, name the team, you take 3 out of 6 with this West Coast trip. You're talking about going at Denver, at the Lakers, at the Clippers, five huge at Memphis, 5 out of the top 6 or 7 teams in the West. They were on the road going up against. And if I would have told any team going into that series, going into that 6-game stretch, so you take 3 out of 6, you sign up for it in a second. Well, the Knicks tomorrow night have a chance to take 4 out of 6 against the LA Lakers, which will be a tall task. I'm not telling you I expect the New York Knicks to win, but if they ever do, they're going to set themselves up very nicely to be that 4 seed. And even if they lose, if they come back home and take care of business against a much more favorable schedule, I think the New York Knicks will be headed into that 4-5 matchup. They have the tiebreaker against the Hawks due to the fact that they've swept them this year, so they kind of have a 2-game lead there. Even though it's only a 1-game lead right now, they have the tiebreaker. The Hawks, however, do play a soft schedule. So if the Knicks go 2-2, they probably more than likely will finish ahead of the Hawks in the standings. The Miami Heat, however, own the tiebreaker against the Knicks due to the fact that they swept them. So if the Knicks and the Heat tie with the same record, the Heat will have the higher seed over the New York Knicks. The Celtics, the Knicks play and that will decide the tiebreaker there. They play them the last game of the season, but if the Knicks have a 2-game advantage going into that game, it makes it non-existent. And right now they own a 3-game advantage over the Boston Celtics. But we're going to go over all the scheduling and talk about what the Knicks need to go their way in order to stay in that 4-5 matchup. Now, the one team that I think that you want to play if you're a New York Knicks fan in the first round that gives us the best opportunity to advance, it's the Hawks. And we're going to go over all their schedules and talk about what needs to happen in order for the Knicks and the Hawks to meet up in the first round. But I wanted to talk about some of the improvements that this team has had really since the first half of the season going into the second half. You're talking about a team over the first 16 games of the year, the first month of the season. They were dead last in three-point attempts over their first 16 games. They only were attempting 26.4 per game and were only making 9.1 for an efficiency rate of 34.6% from the field, which was 25th. They also only attempted 823s over their first 30 games. Over their first 37 games, which was before the All-Star break, they shot 37.2% from three. Okay? Pre-All-Star, overall, they shot 37% from three on 1,027 attempts, which ranked 27th in the league. They were 13th in percentage on 382 makes, which was 25th in the league, and had 511 turnovers, which was 17th, okay, and 13.8 turnovers per game. Post-All-Star, they've gone from 37% as a team to 41% as a team. That is a huge increase in terms of three-point efficiency, and they've gone from 13th in the league to 2nd. They've had 1,008 attempts as opposed to 1,027, but in 6 less games, they've jumped from 27th to 23rd, so they're taking more threes, yet they're shooting them at a more efficient rate. They've had 412 makes, which ranks 13th in the league since the All-Star break. They were 25th in that column pre-All-Star. And they've only committed 380 turnovers over the last 31 games as opposed to 511 over the first 37 before the All-Star break. They were 17th in the league in the first half. They are 2nd in the league in terms of fewest turnovers post-All-Star break. So you're getting a team that is shooting more threes, that is shooting them more efficiently, and that is turning the ball over at a much less rate. Another thing that the Knicks have done that I think will translate well to playoff basketball is they've controlled the pace of play. And what do I mean by controlling the pace of play? The New York Knicks only averaged 99.8 possessions per game, which is not a lot. And what that does is it obviously helps the defense. It makes it so that the opponents don't get as many shot opportunities. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that we don't turn the ball over and we slow down the game. We move the ball around. We don't get a lot of quick buckets. We chew out the clock and we rely on our defense to win games. We've only had 99.8 possessions per game, but we only surrender 105 points per contest. And right now, the New York Knicks rank 1st in field goal percentage against, 1st in three-point percentage against, and 1st in total points against in the entire NBA. It's only happened once in the history of the league where a team has gone an entire season ranking 1st in all 3 categories, and that was the early 90s Knicks. So they're continuing to rely on their defense. Okay? The opponents are only shooting 33.9% against the Knicks from three-point range. Okay? In terms of possessions per game, if you look at the teams that I think are best equipped for the playoffs, the Clippers are actually last in the league at 99.7. They control the pace of play. The Knicks at 99.8. Miami at 100. Dallas at 100.4. And Phoenix at 101. All 5 of those teams are the bottom 5 teams in terms of possession per game, but all 5 of those teams are headed to the playoffs because I think it helps their defense dramatically due to the fact that they're not asked to do as much work. RJ Barrett over this stretch needs to be shouted out more. Of course, Julius Randle's the MVP of the team. And of course, Derrick Rose to me is the guy that I want the ball late in contest. He's a guy that I would rely on in a big spot. You know, he is probably the best shot creator of anybody on this New York Knicks team in terms of being able to create a shot off the dribble, right? And Randle's been incredible all year. He's among one of the top 10 or 15 players in the league and should have his name thrown in the hat at least for MVP consideration. But when you look at what RJ Barrett has done pre-All-Star and post-All-Star in terms of his efficiency, it's pretty impressive. Pre-All-Star, RJ Barrett shot 35% from 3, off a year in which he shot 32% as a rookie, 31% in college at Duke from the college three-point line. Okay, he shot 35% over the first half this year and only attempted 3.3 three-pointers per game. Since the All-Star break, over his last 31 games, he is shooting 43.7% from three. And he's attempting 2 more threes per game. He's attempting 5.3 threes per contest. And some of that has to do with the fact that, yeah, you could see it. RJ's got great mechanics, but the ball movement has been crisp. The Knicks have been getting a lot more open looks, and it's not just Barrett. Randle's been much more efficient than expected. Bullock, everybody. The ball movement has been tremendous, but the way the Knicks have won these games has been 3 and D. They've been efficient when they shoot their three-point opportunities. They're not turning the ball over, and they're holding their opponents to as few points as they possibly can. And if they can continue to do this into the playoffs and control the pace of play, nobody is going to steamroll the New York Knicks. Now, like I said, the Knicks' best opportunity in order to get the 4-5 is to win at least 2, if not 3, of these 4 remaining games. It will not be easy. Right now, if you look at the standings, the Knicks sit firmly atop at the 4 seed. The other 3 teams that are in contention to get into that 4-5 game are the Atlanta Hawks, the Miami Heat, and the Boston Celtics. The Hawks and Heat are both a game behind the New York Knicks. The Hawks play tonight in what will be a back-to-back against the Washington Wizards. The Knicks do own the tiebreaker against the Hawks, meaning that if they tie with the same record, the Knicks would get the better playoff seeding. Miami, however, who Atlanta holds the tiebreaker against, actually owns the tiebreaker against the Knicks because they swept the Knicks this year. Meaning, if they tie us in the standings, the Knicks would actually drop below Miami in the seeding, and Boston sits 3 games behind the New York Knicks, 2 games out of the 6th seed, and obviously 2 games out of the 5 seed as well. And we'll take a look at their schedule also. The Heat and Celtics play one another, and in my opinion, if you're a Knicks fan, you're rooting for the Celtics to win that game. Now let's go over some of the scheduling. This is the remaining schedule for the Atlanta Hawks, and when you look at that schedule, Washington's been playing better. I'm probably going to give them a split there, and then I think they're going to beat Orlando and Houston. So Atlanta, to me, is looking at a 3-1 finish, and that is not the hardest of schedules. Both Washington games are at home. It's possible they could win both, but I'll be conservative and give them 3 out of 4. And if they go 3-1, the Knicks have to go 2-2 to be able to stay above the Atlanta Hawks, being that they own the tiebreaker against Atlanta. Okay? And I think that's very possible. Next up, you've got the Miami Heat. And to me, this is the team I worry most about. It's a team I don't want to play. It's a team with extensive playoff experience. They went to the NBA Finals last year. They have a ton of great three-point shooters. Eric Spoelstra is a great coach. I would much sooner rather play the Atlanta Hawks than the Miami Heat in the first round of the playoffs. At the end of the day, we take who we get, right? If I told you as a Knicks fan going into the year you were going to be in the 4-5, you take whoever you get. This is who Miami's got coming up. At Boston, who they beat in Boston just yesterday by 6 points, 130-24, but it's a 130-124, but it's a big game for Boston. I think Boston will eke that one out. Then you got Philadelphia. Now, the kicker to this, of course, Philadelphia right now is the best team in the Eastern Conference in terms of record, but they have a 3-game advantage on both the Nets and the Milwaukee Bucks. So if they clinch the number 1 seed, that game may mean nothing to them, and I could easily see Miami winning that contest. So we have to hope that that game means something for the 76ers. Then they go to Milwaukee in a game that will absolutely mean a lot for Milwaukee, and at Detroit. Miami, I think you're looking at a 2-2 finish there with the possibility of going 3-1. If they go 3-1, the New York Knicks would also have to go 3-1 to stay above Miami. If they go 2-2, the Knicks would have to go 2-2. They essentially have to match whatever Miami does to stay above them, even though the Knicks have a 1-game advantage because Miami owns the tiebreaker. Then we're going to look at the New York Knicks, before we get to the Boston Celtics. This is the Knicks' remaining schedule. At the Lakers, if you want to be conservative and realistic as possible, you're probably going to pencil that in for a loss. Okay? Then they come home to San Antonio. San Antonio's not a pushover, but we're at home. They're traveling, and it's a game that probably won't mean a ton for San Antonio. Right now, they're in the play-in. I'm not too sure how far they are in the standings in terms of staying above, but of course, they're going to come to play. But if the Knicks are a true 4 seed in the East, that's a game they need to win. They're at home. San Antonio's traveling. There's really no excuses there. Then Charlotte. Another game that won't mean a ton for Charlotte. They're in the play-in game one way or another. I don't think they're going to fall out of it, and they're not going to be able to get into the top 6 seeds. So maybe Charlotte doesn't, try as hard as they possibly can there. And then the game against Boston, that remains to be seen how much that will mean for Boston. Because if Boston, say, loses the next 2, they're probably out of it, and they probably just want to be able to prepare for the play-in game, and it won't mean as much. However, say Boston wins their next 3 or 2 out of 3, that game will mean a ton for the Boston Celtics. In order for Boston not to be able to jump the Knicks going into that game, the Knicks need to own a 2-game advantage on the Boston Celtics. Right now, they own a 3-game advantage with 3 games to play before that game. So if Boston is able to gain 2 games out of the next 3 on the Knicks, that game will mean something. Boston would have an opportunity to pass the Knicks in the standings. And then finally, the Boston Celtics play Miami tomorrow night, 7:30, before the Knicks on the TNT doubleheader. Then at Cleveland, at Minnesota, and at the Knicks. And they should beat both Cleveland and Minnesota. But I think you're rooting for Boston to beat Miami because we have a 3-game advantage. The Knicks just have to take care of business, and it's 1 game at a time. And if they beat Boston that last game of the year, I think it's almost guaranteed a lock that they will be in the 4 or 5 game. In the end, due to the fact that Atlanta's schedule is so soft, if the Knicks win 3 out of their last 4, I think it'll be Atlanta and the Knicks in the first round in the 4-5 matchup. However, if the Knicks do go 2-2 or 1-3, they could easily fall out of that 4 or 5 game and drop to the 6 seed. I don't really see them dropping to the 7. I think they'll avoid the play-in game. But if they're the 6 seed, you'll either get the Nets or Milwaukee in the first round. So it's imperative for the Knicks to continue to win basketball games here down the stretch to get a more favorable opponent, hopefully the Hawks, in the first round, a team that the New York Knicks have beat up on this entire year. Now, they're a tough team. Clint Capela's good down low. Obviously, Trae Young. But if I had to pick one team to match up against that would get us to the second round, it would be the Atlanta Hawks. And if you beat them, then you're probably looking at the Philadelphia 76ers, in which would be a really tough matchup. But it's 1 game at a time. As a Knicks fan, I am thrilled of what this team's been doing. What Derrick Rose did yesterday, I think he put up 25 points off the bench. He's been a godsend to this New York Knicks team. And hopefully the Knicks could keep it going with just 1 more game on this road trip before we come home to close it out. I'm looking forward to calling it with you guys tomorrow. Hopefully the New York Knicks get us another victory. As always, guys, if you liked what you watched, please subscribe. Drop a comment. Maybe give me a little thumbs up. Cheers.